Life Real Estate. I'm Suzanne Prezio, and as you know, each week I do a podcast, and it's not necessarily about buying or selling real estate, which of course, if you want to do that, I can help you at 518-577-6571. You can always call or text me, and don't forget to hit subscribe. Go on your YouTube channel, hit subscribe, and you will get a notification every week of my latest guest. But what this program is about is people in our community who provide a service or have something of interest to share. And today I'm really excited to welcome a dear friend of mine, a blast from the past, Graham Knowles. Hi, Graham.
Hey, how are you, Suzanne? Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
I'm very excited to hear what you have to tell us, because Graham was the PTA president at Roselleville when I was the editor of the newsletter. So we spent many late nights back and forth, me grumbling that why can't they put these articles in on time? I know there's a deadline, I have to chase them. And Graham always being the voice of reason, explaining that, Suzanne, it's not always about you. But we had a wonderful time working together, and I'm happy to be able to sit down with you tonight. So the reason Graham is here is he is running for a position on the South Colonie School District or School Board. And anyone that knows me knows that I think Colonie is the best place in the whole wide world. So I was excited to have someone come on to talk to me about what's new and exciting and on the horizon for the school district. But before we get started on that, Graham, tell me about yourself. Did you grow up around here? Where'd you go to school? Where do you work now? What do you do?
Yeah, for sure. So one of the location questions is always interesting because I always talk about like being across New York State, really. I was born here in the capital region. We won't say like a district to the north. Shen is where I went K through 6. And then lived out in central New York for middle school and high school years. So I went to Lafayette High School out in just south of Syracuse, and that's where I graduated high school. And then I went to college in Rochester for my undergrad at St. John Fisher College, and then moved back to the area. I did my grad work at the College of St. Rose, and that's where Lisa, my wife, and I met. And then I've been in the area ever since 92 is when I started grad school. And I've worked at a number of local colleges. I'm in higher ed, so I'm in education as well as a profession. And then I've been in South Colonie District for 21 years. Both my kids have gone through the district, obviously, being in Roselleville's PTA, but I have 2 kids that have are going through, like my daughter graduated in 2019, and then I have a son that's a junior in the high school right now. So, and then what I do for a living, I work at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. I'm a leadership development staff member there. So I teach leadership and professional development in the School of Engineering and the School of Management. And so I do public speaking and this kind of thing right now for a living, teaching virtually now for over a year. So this routine of being on a Zoom call is what we're all doing now, right? And so that's what I do now for a position. I've been at RPI for this is my 16th year at RPI.
And you forgot to mention that your kids have the best smiles I've ever seen.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so the 2 behind me are my kids, although you can't see Timmy's smile because he's wearing a mask in the soccer tournament. But yeah, both of them thankfully take after my wife and have great smiles.
I'm a Rosebud too. When were you at St. Rose?
So I was St. Rose 92 to 94. So both Lisa and I graduated in 94. Okay. I was undergrad or graduate in 94, and that was her undergrad in 94.
Okay. Yeah, I got out just before you. For some reason, I thought I was a lot older than you, but okay. but
Oh,
I'm
you know, yeah.
so, you've always been actively involved,
Yep.
this is going to sound sexist, but it's a little unusual for a man to be president of the PTA,
Yep.
which I remember thinking, well, this is a breath of fresh air to have a father involved. Um, and your wife is an educator,
Yep.
um, Lisa. She's darling. Um, so it's who you are. It's who the Knowles family, who they are.
Yep.
Um, why are you running for the school board?
Yeah. So um, the real thing, and like you said, like being involved in certainly the education is really important, and so I've done that, and I'll start here. I've done that throughout kind of my career in volunteer efforts, if you will. So PTA president in Roselleville. I was 2 years at the PTA council for the district as well as vice president. I served 5 years as president of the South Colonie, or the Colonie Soccer Club as well. And I've always envisioned and had bringing things to kids and educating through either coaching or PTAs, et cetera. And so those are the things that drive me. Having education and higher ed as part of my experience, those are the things that drives me. And so why now? I can really probably point to I believe it was right before the pandemic started. It was actually in 2019. Um, my son, there's a foreign language, there's a curriculum policy in South Colonie, and I'm going to get a little in the weeds, but there's a curriculum policy that says that you need to take a foreign language through your junior year. And my son was on a path where coming out of middle school, he skipped or he had credit for French 1 and 2. And so he was in French 3 as a freshman and French 4 as a sophomore. So he had taken the 4 years of sequence of French, but was still required to take a foreign language his junior year. If that was a different foreign language or if that was a college level French course, they were requiring him to do that. And so Lisa and I both were advocating for different pathways for him because he's very much a STEM student going into the STEM fields. And so developing new pathways within the school district is one of the things. And so that's the crux of why I was passionate about this. And so trying to create and change policy as well as creating these pathways for students to invest in their future and future careers, no matter what that is. If that's going into VOTech through BOCES, if that's through STEM fields with our engineering curriculum, if that's going through the arts and you want to go into performing arts or creative arts, like how can we create these pathways and have enough space in someone's schedule to do that without taking away lunch? That became the option. Like, well, he could skip lunch and do these classes, and I'm like, you're talking a 3-year, 3-season athlete,
Yeah,
and
right.
asking a student to skip lunch, and so I really felt like there needed to be some change that happened. So that was the crux of why I started thinking about the school board, and then here I am, right? And so definitely looking to be able to, and one of my top platform issues is about the curriculum change. Thankfully, out of this, the news just came out from they're piloting a new curriculum pathways concept starting next year in the high school. So our advocacy started to work, right? And so I want to continue to be a part of moving this forward to be formalized in policy for the district as one of the things that I want to get done.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah, usually takes something happens to Every action causes a reaction. So I'm glad. I'm glad that
For
this
sure.
sparked your interest. Talking about getting passionate, this is one of mine. From what I was able to find online, South Colonie currently ranks 13th out of 83 districts. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is so if you go to my website, this is the number one. Like this is closely linked with what I was just talking about
Your website
with
is what?
it's grahamcknowles.wixsite.com is my school board website that I created that's got like
Graham's dot what?
Wixsite WIXSITE.com.
Okay.
Yeah, and so that's where you can learn more about me and also some of my platform issues for sure. But the first one is really closely linked, Suzanne, to this curriculum change, right? And so, and I love, there's probably different rankings out there because US News is the one that I looked at, and that ranks Colony at 24th. Right? And
Ouch.
so yeah, right. So listen, what you do in real estate, right? So is closely linked to the school district and how the school district is ranked. Because guess what? North Colony, number 4. How can a few miles be so different in the rankings, right? And so my movement is, or the thing that I'm passionate about, and that links really much to real estate, is how do we move South Colonie up these rankings? You got to do a little more diving into your to what the rankings are about, right? And how they measure the metrics that they use for those rankings. Certainly some of it is out of our control. Some of it is societal and impact, economic impact of the community that's South Colonie. That is what brings a lot of people to South Colonie, is the diversity and et cetera. So there's a piece of that that's somewhat out of our control, right? There's this economic and societal piece, but there's a lot of things that are within the school district's control. The number of AP courses that we offer, the number of the number of students that take those AP tests, the number that score a 3 or above on those AP tests, the number of students that start in 9th grade and continue through 12th grade, those things are very much within our control, right? There's also out of the high school, then you look at the testing that happens within the 3rd to 8th grade levels, right? That they're pulling some of that testing data to drive this ranking as well. So as we can do better on those tests, our step up in those rankings happens as well. So I think there's a lot of things that we can put our effort into as a district. And part of it ties to what we were just talking about, is creating pathways and curriculum where we can offer more AP classes in different areas, right? We offer nothing in creative or performing arts as an AP credit, and those things do exist, right? So let's offer some different pathways AP that will help us boost that ranking, but also give the students the pathways that they want to explore. So there's a lot to that, where I want to move, like my goal is like move that where we're in the top 10, right, in that ranking, then 13th or 24th, like whichever one you're looking at. So those are the things that I'm looking at and also thinking about in terms of how do I help and push the district along to think of these things as a future board member and make these priorities in several different areas for that to happen.
Well, you've got my vote, because I will tell you, it makes me crazy in that I'll have a South Colonie listing. And again, I think South Colonie is the best place in the whole wide world. I love South Colonie. I love it. I was president of my class.
Right.
My kids went there. Um, And I'll get a call about one of my listings, and the buyer will say, oh, it's South Colonie. We only want North Colonie. Or I'm working with buyers and they say that, and I'm thinking, yeah, but you're going to let the South Colonie kid negotiate your contract. And I happen to be pretty good at what I do. Um, so I remember going into the building, the high school, with a newsletter they had sent out, and it said that we were number 16. I said, I have never, because I don't have a filter, Graham. I've never gone to a sporting event where people have said, we're number 16. Yeah. I mean, you're happy about this? You're happy about this.
Right.
So, speaking of happy, the ice cream man's coming. That makes
Yes, they just came through my neighborhood.
so, uh, I do like the path that you're on for this. I do.
Okay. Yeah.
What do you think is the school district's biggest challenge? Of course, now we have a plane. We just had the we just had the ice cream man. Now we have a plane.
It's full of transportation today, right? It is like the secondary theme. The biggest challenge, I think, I think moving us in the rankings is one of it. I think getting out of the way that we used to do business as in education, right? Is we've come so far. We're in 2021, and the issue that I was talking about in terms of foreign language, that was a 1995 policy that was still on the books, and right, we're 25 years in, and we haven't looked at and changed a policy as the times in education has changed, and they've changed a great deal. And certainly this pandemic has and will cause education to look different and need to be different. And so I think pushing it along to look differently at what we can do in terms of education, I think being able to diversify some of our positions within the district. And the last Board of Education meeting, my public comment was around that issue was, what are we doing to attract and hire and retain diverse members of teachers, staff, and administrators? Like, I think all three of those need representation on them for sure. And so that's one of the biggest challenges, because what I got back from Dr. Perry was they've got some ways that they're starting to recruit, but they're not turning that recruiting into actual candidates to apply, into those candidates accepting positions. Like, we've got to help move that bar along as a challenge to get some folks into the district as employees that represent the face, like our community. I want to see a representation of equity and inclusion there. And then I think the budget is always and this year we're in better place now that some funding came through, from what I understand from the state. We were looking at a $3.2 million shortfall, and now we're looking at a $500,000 shortfall. So
Okay.
that gap has really shrunk, which is good. But there's still going to be some hard decisions. And I love, Sherry Fisher, I can't remember her official title, the business official for the district. I mean, the district's budget it's a people-driven organization. Like 86% of the budget is staffing and benefits, right? And so
86%?
86% is around salaries and benefits. And so, that's what your thing that you're selling basically is the right, all the teachers, staff, and all of that, administrators, etc., to do the teaching. And so that is eye-opening. That right. So there's two things to do, right? You either and then you have unions, right? And so you either reduce staff, right, as a cost saving measure, because that's your biggest pot of money is going towards salary and benefits, because there really isn't much left to it. When you think about, you know, 13-14% of the budget is all the other things that happen, technology, sports, music, all of those things are that 14%.
Do you know how that compares with other districts?
I do not, but I believe it's still, Lisa works in another local district, and it's pretty similar in her district. That's the only kind of reference that I have for it. But it's education. It's, a lot of your budget is in those areas. And so I think that's a challenge that's always going to be there. And then you have the challenge of, so that's the expense side of the budget, right? And so the revenue side of the budget, there's two main sources, right? There's taxes, right? And then there's state and federal subsidies or grants, right? And so, and I probably didn't use the right term, but those are the two pots of money from the revenue side. So when luckily this year, the state and federal actually surprisingly came through big for education, which is why we've got $2.5 million more towards a shorter deficit, is because state and federal money came in that they weren't initially expecting. And so, but when that gets drawn back by either one of those organizations, you're left with taxes, or then controlling the expense side of your budget. So it's a really fine tuned budget that I knew some about, but paying attention this year, there's a lot of things to pay attention to. And from the state, we were looking at a $3.2 million shortfall, and now we're looking at a $500,000 shortfall. So
Okay.
that gap has really shrunk, which is good. But there's still going to be some hard decisions. And I love, Sherry Fisher, I can't remember her official title, the business official for the district. I mean, the district's budget it's a people-driven organization. Like 86% of the budget is staffing and benefits, right? And so they're not.
86%?
86% is around salaries and benefits. And so, that's what your thing that you're selling basically is the right, all the teachers, staff, and all of that, administrators, etc., to do the teaching. And so that is eye-opening. That right. So there's two things to do, right? You either and then you have unions, right? And so you either reduce staff, right, as a cost saving measure, because that's your biggest pot of money is going towards salary and benefits, because there really isn't much left to it. When you think about, 13-14% of the budget is all the other things that happen, technology, sports, music, all of those things are that 14%.
Do you know how that compares with other districts?
I do not, but I believe it's still, Lisa works in another local district, and it's pretty similar in her district. That's the only kind of reference that I have for it. But it's education. It's, a lot of your budget is in those areas. And so I think that's, that's a challenge that's always going to be there. And then you have the challenge of, so that's the expense side of the budget, right? And so the revenue side of the budget, there's two main sources, right? There's taxes, right? And then there's state and federal subsidies or grants, right? And so, and I probably didn't use the right term, but those are the two pots of money from the revenue side. So when, luckily this year, the state and federal actually surprisingly came through big for education, which is why we've got $2.5 million more towards a shorter deficit, is because state and federal money came in that they weren't initially expecting. And so, but when that gets drawn back by either one of those organizations, you're left with taxes or then controlling the expense side of your budget. So it's a really fine tuned budget that I knew some about, but paying attention this year, there's a lot of things to pay attention to. And then I think Suzanne, to your point in terms of even you as a realtor in the area, and we've talked about that strong connection already, but where can we get community support, community and organization and employer support to somewhat generate some revenue for the school district, right? So how can they talk about revenue generation? How can we tap into the organizations within our own community to support them, but also generate some revenue, right? And so how can we do that within the limitations that's put on a public education system as well? So those, I think, are probably the three revenue generators there that we could start looking at.
These are great questions, and I will certainly be happy to continue this conversation with you.
Yeah.
And you touched on my question of what's your vision for education in this community, but I want to go back to the budget for a second. And I get that this is something that you're just getting your toes wet. And this may sound like an odd question, but is the budget the budget? In other words, well, that's the way we've always done it. I mean, do they look at it every year and reassess what's in the budget, or make some modifications, or does the budget change as far as what, even with the pandemic now? I mean, you don't need, but when school closed, obviously there weren't janitors there every day, buses weren't running every day, things were different expenses. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there are, I have an eye for specifics. And so I like going through the current budget and looking at line by line. And I think, to your point, that there is, there are a lot of places where the budget just, we had this line, we spent everything, and so we're rolling that budget line forward, or we're forecasting there's going to be an increase or a decrease in that line. And I think budget lines in general stay stagnant within it. Probably the areas that it most changes is in any school budget vote. And remember, May 18th is the school budget vote.
I'll
do that little plug now, but you'll notice on there that there are other, I'm losing the term for it, but there are other things, resolutions to vote for, right? You vote for the budget propositions. You vote for the budget, but then there are other propositions. And this year, there's a proposition about the school district purchasing this piece of property for the future bus garage and district office to be on. And so that is, I think, proposition one on there. There's always like buses that need to be bought in their yearly renewal of different buses, and so you can cycle those through. So there's those propositions that change based on what's needed for the district, and part of that vision. And so I think there is some look at it through those propositions and the budgeting process that way. But I think there could be probably, what I'd like to bring is a finer eye to that budgeting process and thinking about what we really need and what we want. Like, there's a difference for me between needs and wants, and as parents we do that all the time, right? Is, do you need that or do you want that, right? And I think that same kind of concept can be brought to the district of like, is that something we need or is it something that we want? And so I think those types of things are part of the budgeting process. But like I said, there's a lot that I don't understand about the budget. And so I think, to your point, I think with the pandemic, there were some reallocating of staff that happened even in the March, April, May, June last year, when we were all kind of learning and transitioning to a virtual online platform. I had to do it as a higher ed instructor. But then they reallocated, like, maybe audience members don't realize, like the district provided school lunches for every student that wanted them, no matter what, at zero cost. So the district never got any revenue from school lunches, but they were putting out all these lunches as it was required of the school district. There was, like, the school bus drivers weren't driving their routes, but they were driving to deliver these lunches. They were driving to deliver school, like they put assistants, et cetera, to drive school materials to different people's houses that didn't have those. So they were being redeployed in different ways, even though they weren't on a big bus driving students from their pickup spots to school. They were still being redeployed in the pandemic. So I think those all were things that maybe people weren't as cognizant of, or they're like, just saw school closed. Why are we paying these folks? But, and then I think there was other things, and I think some organizations, even for-profit organizations, decided that they were going to keep employees on the books in hopes that they would come back, right? So they were paying folks at times to stay at home, right? And so I think there was some of that, like, imagine that we would have to kind of rehire a whole workforce of bus drivers, et cetera, or custodians in July to get ready for August and September. So so right, like, I think there's that piece to it that was being considered. And then I don't know what the CARES Act and all of that, there was certainly some funding that came into the district as well to help support these endeavors. And then the last thing I would say is, last year they definitely had to prepare for school to look the way it does now, with dividers. They had a whole bunch of cleaning machines that they needed to buy, the cleaning solution, et cetera, that they had to use to get through a whole school year. They had to invest last summer to be able to do that. So I think there was a lot of expenses that happen that people may not have been at the forefront of their mind thinking about, for sure.
Well, it's like we were talking about that earlier when I said, we as the public only look at it from our side of the street. It's kind of like with my job. To some people, it looks as though, I unlock the door and I walk in and I say, well, here's the living room, here's the dining room. Would you like to buy this house? They don't see at, 10 of 10, your buyer just called to say, oh my goodness, I lost my job today, or there's a buried oil tank, or, they don't see when the chaos happens and you're up until 2:30 in the morning trying to talk people out of the tree and juggle all of this stuff. Uh, it's very easy to say, well, be a teacher because you have, June, July, and August off, and you get paid, and it's, the same curriculum every year. How hard is it? I would not do it, and I will tell you right now, I would not do what you're attempting to do. Running for the school board, Graham, you have my utmost admiration, because
Well,
you got to really love it to put yourself out there like that.
yeah, thank you. And I think, the one thing that I do want to make sure your audience knows is, like, school board, yes, you run and you get elected. It's voluntary though. Like, there's no compensation for it, right? Like, you're doing it because you want people who are passionate about education, passionate about the school district to do it, because there's a lot of, like, real estate, like, there's a lot of time and commitment behind the scenes, prepping for meetings, reviewing policy, all your subcommittees that you're on that are part of the job, right? It's all voluntary. And so, yeah, that's the thing that I want to make sure people recognize, like, before you start yelling at your board members, they're volunteers, right? Like, you can respectfully talk about your position, why it's your position, and they'll try to advocate for you. That's what I want to do for all of you. But we're all volunteers on the board. If I'm lucky enough to get on, like, just recognize that for sure.
Thank you for coming on today. That was the fastest half hour.
Yes.
Maybe we'll see you before the May 18th election. Before I let you go, real quick.
Yeah.
Dead or alive, if you could have dinner with anyone, who would it be?
Oh, dead or alive? Yeah. This is probably an easy cop out. My mom, who passed away just over 5 years ago. I would love to be able to have one of her home cooked dinners again, and be able to ask her questions that I now think I have an eye for, but I really don't know. So I would want to ask her some questions that's come up in the last 5 years for sure. But outside of my mom, like, probably Alexander Hamilton. Like, I watched Hamilton, like, during the pandemic, and I would love to kind of, I'm a history major, so, like, the historical reference of Alexander Hamilton and all of that time that happened, I would love to kind of learn more about.
Both great answers. Loved the one about your mom. That's a lovely sentiment. And again, thank you so much for taking the time, and wish you the best of luck on the 18th.
Thank you.
Confident you'll be successful, and please tell Lisa and the kids I said hi.
I will. All right. Bye.
Bye.